Illuminate Teens. I got another fella to be able to tell you about here today, and his name is David. You've heard of him, most likely. If not, I get to teach you about him here for the first time. And so we find here that a shepherd slays a giant. A shepherd slays a giant, if I can even say the words. All right, so the doctrine here is Christ is king, because Christ is the King of Kings. He's the best king. He comes in, and just like it says here as the main point of this story, God is looking for a king who reflects his heart and will fight for his people. And that is David in this case, but Christ comes and he's even better than David. He has God's heart. He reflects that because he is God, and he fights for his people. He dies for his people, and he rises again for his people, conquering sin and death. So he is the King of Kings. But as we get into this, here we have Saul is rejected as king because of his disobedience, his half-hearted disobedience, or obedience, if you want to say it like that, in the sense that he tries to do what God says, but he doesn't do it in the exact way that God states it. He didn't destroy the Amalekites like he was supposed to. He kept the best animals for himself, claiming that they were going to make the sacrifice, and yet really he wasn't. So as we get into this, Saul is rejected. And what do you think the difference is between someone who's rejected God or is doing it halfway versus one who actually reflects God's heart? Because David is one who is described as a man after God's own heart. And how does that work out in your life? Someone who's got partial obedience or someone who actually reflects God's heart? So David is going to be coming along. He's going to be the king, which moves on to David being the example here, but looking forward to who comes later on in his line, Jesus. And he's the eternal king. So Samuel is told to go out to find this king, this man. And he goes out to Jesse's home in Bethlehem. Who's Jesse? The son of Obed, who is the son of Ruth and Boaz. So just connected that story here. But he goes out to Jesse's home. He goes through his 7 sons, and one by one, he looks at them and he thinks maybe this is the guy. Maybe they hold on to these qualities as king on the outward, and God says no. For each one, all the way down till they get to the last one. And the relevant quality is the heart within someone. And David, the youngest, who wouldn't be the one that you would choose, only God chooses him. He's the one that has that heart that God's looking for. He's the one that has the check on the checkbook. Makes all the check marks here. And so David comes in from the field. Samuel anoints him as king. Because of this, in 1 Samuel 16:7, it says there, "But the Lord said unto Samuel, Look not on his countenance or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart." And he's actually describing the firstborn, who was tall, good looking. I mean, he had great stature. Everything was good. He would be kingly. And that's who Samuel would have picked. But God said, no way. Look at his heart. You can't see his heart. God looks at the heart. So, I mean, I ask you, what does culture identify with their expectations in leaders? I know some people will vote on a president based on how good looking they are. Or how great of a speaker they might be. I mean, there's different levels or expectations that our culture has. But what's our expectations? It doesn't line up with God as far as who would be a great leader. You know, David has the heart. But what are some of the snap judgments that we make on people based on their look? Based on how much they smell, or in what way they smell, or what they wear, or what are these snap judgments that we make? And then realizing that God does look at the heart, how does that affect you? in the sense of if God is looking at my heart, does that make me shameful? In the sense that, well, he knows exactly what I believe, what I'm thinking. I mean, God knows the deepest part of me. What does that say? Well, then I don't have to worry about how tall I am, how fat I am, or skinny I am, or how good I look, or whatever that might be. I don't have to worry about those, but I do need to focus my attention on what really matters, and that is my heart. And so what about you? So David is anointed. He's set apart and dedicated as king for God. He's going to take over after Saul's dead. And so all of a sudden, we jump into a situation where we're on the battlefield. And Israel doesn't know this yet because it has been told to Israel, but they're going to get a future glimpse, or a glimpse of their future king. They're going to get a glimpse, they're going to take a look at who this guy is that's going to be their king. So we're on the battlefield, and there's a hero for the Philistines. Yes, fighting the Philistines again. There's a hero that steps out for the Philistines, and he wants to have a one-on-one with somebody from Israel. And yet Israel, all they are doing is hiding. They don't want to step out in the name of God or Israel. They are afraid. And Goliath steps out. He's 9 foot tall. He's a giant. He's huge. I mean, a lot of us would be scared of him just due to the fact of how overpowering he would be over the natural man. But as we get into 1 Samuel, we see that David is actually sent to go and help his brothers by giving them food and things. So he's sent to the battlefield, not as a person in the army, but as a supplier. And so in 1 Samuel 17, verse 23, it says, "And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them." So he hears who this guy is. He hears what Goliath has to say. Verse 26, "And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" So who is this guy that's standing up against God's army? And it goes on in verse 34 through 37, and it says, "And David said unto Saul, Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God." David said, "Moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said unto David, "Go, and the Lord be with thee." And so David says, hey, listen, this guy is standing up and he's defying, he's taunting God's army. I'm going to go and take care of this guy. Why? Because God's behind me. God's the one that's going to fight my battles. God's the one. I'm having faith in God because he delivered me back when I was able to kill a lion and a bear when they tried to attack our flock. I'm trusting God. The same God that took care of me then will take care of me now. And Saul says, go ahead, go do it. You know, and he tries on Saul's armor and he doesn't fit in it. So he says, no, I'm not going to use that. He goes and gets 5 smooth stones, and he ends up going against Goliath and taking him out by slinging a rock. Hit his forehead. He fell down face flat, and then he ended up killing Goliath. And so this is a situation where David steps out. He has faith, but he has to take action at the same time. He's not going to just sit back and say, God, you just do it. No, he actually gets up. He has to go get the 5 smooth stones and put his life in jeopardy for the sake of Israel. Now, you notice in this whole entire thing, you know, David doesn't go in and say, I'm going to win this and that's it. He's always pointing to God. But you know what? He's not just standing for himself, and this is a winner takes all type of a deal, to where if he loses, Israel loses. This is a pretty big situation. There's a lot of pressure on the table for this. So let me ask you this in application. How you need to step out and just to have faith that your God's going to win the day, but you need to step out. You need to take that step. There has to be action. Some of you, well, God, give me a job. I know this is nothing in comparison to putting your life in jeopardy here. You say, God, give me a job. And you're sitting on your couch and doing nothing about it. You don't care. You don't have faith. At that point, you're not willing to do anything for it. You need to step out and go and apply. Go in and talk to someone about it. He's not going to just throw it in your lap and say, hey, I've done everything. He wants us to go to action here. So how are you doing that? So in response here in verses 45 through 51, it says, Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the hosts of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give it into our hands. And it came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, and that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and took thence a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with the sling and with the stone, and smote the Philistine, and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. They ran away, saying, this whole entire time, all that David's doing is pointing to God. He takes action, and when David wins, it's not just him, Israel wins, and it's not just Israel, the God of Israel wins, because God made it happen. He was faithful in providing protection and delivering David to win the day. How much do you talk about your God? How much credit do you give your God? Is he your God? That's a question. And what are some of the giants in your life that you need to just trust God with, but then go to action to try to conquer these things? As we back up, how does Christ connect? Well, we've already seen that. We've already stated it. And then David ends up becoming king, and he rules well, and he goes to fight for his people. Well, the same thing is with Christ. Christ comes in David's line. He does what God wants him to do. He reflects God's heart. He is God. He is deity. And he ends up going to fight for the people. So we can be saved. So we can have salvation. So much to say about David and his start in being chosen for kingship. So I trust that this challenge makes sense to you and will have application in your life. We'll talk to you later, teens.